welcome to another episode of the Hive Mind podcast. This week we have Ceteris on holiday, so to replace him, we brought in Jason, head of markets at Delphi Research, and as always, we have Jan, managing partner at Delphi Ventures, and Duncan. What is it again? Shitcoin scavenger.
Gem hunter.
I'll say gem hunter. That's it. So yeah, we have a lot to chat about this week. We had the ETH ETF. We had Trump changing tune on politics and kind of single-handedly changing the crypto regulatory landscape in the US, and a bunch of other stuff too. So I guess we'll start with the ETF. Who wants to context set here on what happened? Like, obviously there was this consensus that the ETF wasn't going to get approved, and then sometime on Monday, Eric Balkanis, the ETF guy, like tweeted and updated his odds from like, what was it, 5% to like 75%.
It was like 25 to 75, I think.
Was it? Okay. I remember him saying at some point that he thought it was like less than 10%, but yeah, I guess the official was 25%. Market was slow to react, but then seems like it happened. What's the who wants to start with like adding context or just your take on it?
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I guess obviously, people, I think basically nobody thought it was going to happen. So obviously that caught the market offside. Like the ETH was up like 20% that day, which is a pretty insane move. And just to contextualize that, I think that one day it added like the entire market cap of Solana, which is pretty crazy to think about. But I think overall the ETH ETF is going to be like really bullish for alts and kind of the broader crypto ecosystem. And I wrote a little bit about this on Twitter, that just like, I don't know if you want to go into that now or we can kind of save that. But the Bitcoin ETF was kind of isolated to affecting Bitcoin because there's no real like ecosystem around it. So like the flows come into Bitcoin goes up, and people are like chasing other things because like Bitcoin's just the market beta, but there's no direct like flow through of like that money actually going into the broader ecosystem, especially after 2021, where like a lot of like the Bitcoin like lending products, even on like the CeFi side or kind of like the leverage side, have been like don't really exist anymore. So it was pretty isolated just to Bitcoin, but like Ethereum's a lot more intertwined with like the broader DeFi and crypto ecosystems. So its price moving affects DeFi and alts a lot more. Like we can go into that now, or we can kind of save that conversation for later. But I think it's pretty bullish for Ethereum, and especially like kind of Ethereum DeFi and Ethereum-based alts, where Bitcoin, was more just the market leader. I actually saw a tweet this morning that said only like 7 coins have gotten past their like BTC all-time highs since 2021, which is crazy, right? If you think about it, only 7 altcoins have like reached new highs against Bitcoin from last cycle, even though we're already
I think you do it on a market cap basis. It's probably quite a few more though, right? With all the issuance, and it kind of goes back to what's happened over the past 2 years. But yeah, I think the biggest thing was no one was expecting it. Market moves, and now you're in this kind of lull in terms of figuring out when it actually goes live, and when you see the flows kick in. Right, so we pumped from basically 3K to 38, and are now in this kind of limbo status where what were previous headwinds on the regulatory side and an ETF rejection are now hopeful tailwinds, just because the crypto user base in the US has kind of hit critical mass where it goes from something you could push away to now there's enough of a single issue voter contingent that you kind of need to appeal to them to some extent.
No, Jason, do you want to say something before I was going to ask another question about the ETF?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess like the way I was looking at it, right? I guess a lot of people who have like read the stuff that I've written or listened to it or whatever, like I was certainly not in the camp of May approval by any stretch of the imagination. I was kind of leaning towards probably like an early 2025, approval, similar to like Bitcoin, right? How you get those delays, everything gets figured out and then, pushed through on like one of the last deadlines, so to speak. And so obviously like this has definitely changed things, right? Like if you were like 2 weeks ago, I was very confident in my allocation into like the ecosystems and coins I was in. And then fast forward today, I mean, I'm not like super unconfident, but like
Into your memes?
I obviously need to take into account new information, right? And I think the vast majority of the market probably is in that position, right? Even some of the ETH guys, right? Because they're like, okay, well, like now ETH is approved. Where do I want to like allocate to within ETH, right? And I guess this is like what I want to ask you guys. Like now that like it's kind of like ball is in the court for ETH, it's like where's the best place?
Are
to
you
allocate?
telling me you're rotating out of your memes?
No,
is that what
I'm
you're
just
saying?
buying more shit
Live on the Hive Mind.
Just buying more
we're
shit.
out of whiff, we're out of bonk, we're into
No.
real projects.
The first project I bought was Pepe when the ETH ETF
news
started breaking. To be honest,
I'll answer
it was
your
moving
question.
strongest.
But maybe before we move on to like what alts to buy as ETH beta, what do you guys think about like the ETH price performance generally and like upside from here? Because obviously I think a lot of people thought that the ETF rejection was kind of bullish because it gave the bull market more time, gave Bitcoin more time to get ingrained, like the Bitcoin ETF, rather than having this like other thing competing for flows. And you also just have more time to speculate, right? Whereas now it's getting approved earlier. And then at the same time, the performance, obviously that candle was ridiculous, but since then performance has kind of been underwhelming. Is this a case of like people were so off sides, like ETH sentiment was just at an all-time low, and so it's just going to take time for it to sort of reprice and for people to come in and adjust to this? Or is this showing some like ETH weakness and some like projection that the ETF isn't going to be that bullish?
I think
I
think the move was pretty strong.
I think it was mostly internal money that moved around, right? And so now there needs to be time for the narrative to get crafted for TradFi to move in. Is it, oil to BTC's gold type stuff, and just a way that they can get on board to invest? Because if you look at kind of, the flows in Q1, you had a combination of retail, but there was a decent amount of institutional investors, right? Like the amount of, I forget the amount of funds that came out and filed their TNFs, but it was like a record breaking amount, many multiples of what gold did when it launched their ETFs. Granted, that was it was like early mid 2000s. So very different story in terms of the landscape, but you still saw quite a bit of kind of institutional demand, and so that did help drive those flows. It wasn't retail, and it also wasn't a scenario where we thought institutions would take a while to onboard for a handful of reasons. I think the larger amount of them are still in the process of doing so, just based on a whole host of kind of factors we've talked about, but they did move the needle in Q1 for BTC price. So I think you don't necessarily have this sell the news type scenario, but you need time to kind of craft the narrative, and basically, and that flow can only really happen once the ETF launches. So I think what you saw now was basically immediate crypto repositioning. Leverage ticked up, but not an insane amount. The CMEOI ticked up, but not like an insane amount. This isn't a massively leverage driven rally. There's a combination of both spot and leverage, but showing that you do have this first leg, but I think the second leg to come is still going to be there, and is more of a flows system that happens once it launches, rather than something that needs to get completely front run.
Yeah, I think I probably agree with a lot of that. I'm trying to like remember back to when BlackRock filed their whatever.
It took a while.
But like it was like very much clear that the Bitcoin ETF would be approved when BlackRock started its process, right? Like everybody, the Bloomberg boys, everybody who actually like follows these processes, like the lawyer Scott Johnson, all those guys, like once BlackRock started entering that like ETF process for Bitcoin, was it like March or April of last year, right? Like it was very clear that like the end game was approval. So like you had that like 6-month, 7-month period of like Goldilocks speculating. You had the fiscal situation in the US getting like, worse and worse. People started talking about it. So you had like that perfect narrative that nobody really had to go looking for, to Jan's point, for Bitcoin. My thing with ETH is like, yeah, that first day performance was awesome, but like I'm kind of, I don't know if Jose was like alluding to that. I did find the follow through price action over the last several days to be pretty weak. You had several more positive news headlines come out and price couldn't really do anything with it. And since then it's kind of just, bleeding out slowly. It's not really bleeding out, but it's just more so going sideways and selling off a little bit. So like, I'm not sure the market really knows exactly how it wants to play this run up. And I'm also not sure the market knows exactly how to play it. It's like, okay, do the S1s and stuff go live, and does it start trading in a month? Does it start trading 3 months from now? Like, I think that kind of ambiguity is kind of, at least in the short term, making, positive price action and momentum moves above like prior all-time highs. Cause like, you don't really have anywhere else to go, right? Like you're at 4K, next stop is like new highs, right? So like, I just think there's probably a lot of sellers up here that are just using this as an opportunity to kind of like get out. And then like over the next couple of weeks and months, you probably start to see the actual run up into approval.
Yeah, I think
Kinda how I'm
also the
thinking.
other thing, like there's ambiguity around like when it'll actually be launched, and also like you have probably a little bit of like the market reacting to how, like how will the flows absorb like the ETH outflows, right? Because like after the Bitcoin ETF, like we sold off like pretty hard.
Yeah, it's a couple weeks.
For like 2 or 3 weeks before we had like our insane rip. So obviously those same dynamics are at play with ETH, and I think to a similar magnitude, if not more. Like there's 10 billion in the in AUM and ETH, so that's like I think we've had like half or more of GBTC unwind. So maybe they're not going to drop the fee or maybe they're going to drop the fee more aggressively. So you
Don't
have
they
like
already
less
have
come
that
out.
separate product set up though with less fees?
They have the Bitcoin mini trust. I don't know if that's
Do
live
they
yet.
not have that for ETH?
I'm
Or is
sure
it
they're
just
going to do the
set up
same
for
thing,
ETH?
but I don't
Okay.
even think the Bitcoin mini one is live. But obviously, like then the CEO of Grayscale got fired or stepped down or something. So obviously they weren't super happy with the outflows. But like I don't know what they were going to expect when they had 1.5% fee versus IBIT at like 30 bips, and then also all that kind of stuck capital that was trading in there under NAV for so long. But I think like the reaction was pretty good so far, and then it'll get better as there's more clarity around the actual launch, and then also as the market kind of comes to digest the ETH stuff. Because if there's going to be a few billion in selling, that's obviously that like it knows is going to happen just because of these like bankrupt estates or whatever. Like there's probably an element where it doesn't want to get ahead of that. But as we saw with the BTC ETF, like that happened, and then we ripped after. So like there's conflicting things there.
I kind of agree with Jason that the price action was weaker than I expected. I would have expected, like, given where sentiment was as well, where the odds of this were priced at, and like, there was Peter Zilagi arguing with with Dankrat on Twitter. There was like ETH maxi capitulation. I just expect it would have expected like a pop to, I don't know, near all time highs or all time highs, and then sell off from there rather than this. But I don't know. I also think it's possible that the sentiment kind of misrepresents what's actually happening, because I do think a lot of people just denominate in ETH, and a lot of whales, especially, like just denominate in ETH and haven't really sold it. Yeah, so maybe but then I would have expected that there wouldn't be that many sellers either up here. Like if you, but I don't know.
So they're rotating into
Bitcoin didn't rip to
into
all-time highs though,
memes.
right? Immediately, like Bitcoin didn't either.
Yeah,
So if you kind of use its price action relative to its previous high as a proxy,
Yeah,
it's
but
not
like
too
when the news of
dissimilar.
Bitcoin's ETF came out, like that was like right when like Gary was getting really, really terrible with regulations. It was literally like at the pico bottom of Bitcoin was like 20K. So like
Yeah,
expecting
like
it to rip
25K or
like
something.
expecting it to rip to 70K before ETFs were live and flows. Like, I don't know. I wasn't really expecting that, but like, it's hard for me to like judge this ETH thing, right? Because like I've been severely underweight ETH for the majority of this cycle. So like, I'm clearly biased here. So like, I'm very curious to see like Zay's like, take on this going forward, because he's obviously way more in the weeds with that stuff. And like, what's like the way to think about it? Think about the ETH ecosystem now that you actually don't have all of this, like regulatory headwinds in the way. Like, what's the proper way to think about it?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think that should be what we talk about next, like ETH beta, I guess, or beta, or like what do you guys think benefits from this? Personally, I don't have a great like answer or pick for, but I wouldn't have one on any ecosystem. Like, I don't think there's great beta either. Like, I just think a lot of the stuff that's publicly trading is pretty expensive. I do think, like, I have a few, definitely Maker, we've talked about on this podcast before. I'm pretty excited about what they're doing and the comeback there. There's a bunch of other like kind of DeFi protocols on ETH that are pretty underpriced relative to like traction, I'd say. But curious what you guys are thinking on that.
What do you like think about like the first thing that came to mind was for me, it was like, okay, well, like if ETH is now going to be something that, potentially outperforms or does outperform, obviously everything. And this probably goes to Duncan's Twitter thread, right? On his like ETH reflexivity thing, right? Like obviously ETH ecosystem alts should probably outperform the native token in some ways. So like, my initial thought was like, okay, like if everybody on Sol bought memes, probably people are going to buy Pepe or whatever shit there. But then I was like, in that same post in our, in internal Delphi chats, I was like, I don't know, Athena makes a lot of sense, right? Because if everybody starts gambling on ETH and funding rates and stuff start going high, like it just makes a ton of sense just from like a very like explain like I'm 5, keep it simple, stupid methodology.
You're just fighting like issuance on Athena, I feel like is the big thing.
Yeah, I'm obviously like very bullish on Athena and like farmed a lot of it, so I have like stuff that hasn't unlocked yet, which definitely affects my judgment on it. I'm super bullish. I also think like the Bybit integration hasn't properly gone live yet, in terms of Bybit actually integrating the yield side, and I think that'll be like really huge. Because we haven't talked about this on the podcast, but I just think no like stablecoin outside of Tether, USDC, and BUSD has been integrated into CeFi and as collateral for perps. And with the Athena integration, you can basically get like 45 to 50, depending where Athena's trading and where you think it's going to be trading at the end of season 2 in 4 months, like 45 to 50% yield on your collateral that you're trading perps against, right? And all you're giving up is basically it's a 90% LTV instead of the 100% that you normally get with stable coins. And it just feels like a lot of people will move over to Bybit and USD as collateral. I think that could drive a lot of issuance. And then from there, it's like, to me, a short step to just having USD denominated perp markets, right? Like if you're using USD as collateral, why do you want to trade with Tether pairs and risk like taking the exchange rate risk on USD and Tether, right? And then I also think it's a small step for other. Sorry?
No, I was gonna say, I think the step from USD not being able to be used as collateral to being used as collateral is a lighter lift operationally and a much bigger impact than the next step of moving to USDE based trading pairs, which I think is a much larger lift in terms of operationally integrating that and everyone having to switch over and it takes a while. Like it's always going to be a less liquid market, and then eventually it's a more liquid market. So you have a pretty annoying cold start problem there. So the difficulty of integrating that versus the upside is there's certainly upside in having all these USDE based pairs on these exchanges, but I think again like lift versus reward on underlying collateral, massive. Lift versus, or like very favorable lift versus reward on USDE integrating as a cross asset trading pair, not great.
I guess the step,
but I agree it's a good next step.
Well, to me, that it's like Bybit integrates, and then I think if the response is good, and I don't see why it wouldn't be, like a lot of people moving to Bybit USD as collateral, I think other centralized exchanges will move to do this too, right? And like that's why this point season is so bullish, because it's basically like subsidized business development, right? Everyone wants to integrate USD because they can provide yield to their users, and you actually don't even have to pay for these integrations. Like people are pushing to integrate with you, and then I think other exchanges integrate it, and then yeah, maybe the trading pair sort of takes longer. And then there's also like Athena chain, which I think is a pretty interesting vision, and some of the other stuff they laid out in that white paper post. Like Duncan said, I think the challenge with ENA is just the supply demand dynamics, like figuring out, because you basically have let's assume that season 2 hands out the same amount of tokens as season 1 for simplicity. Then you have like 2% of ENA supply that's unlocking over the next like 4 months, and then another 5% hitting the market in, or like probably 2.5%, assuming they do the same vest, right? 2.5% hitting the market in the 4 months, and then another 2.5% unlocking for the next 6 months after that, assuming there's a season 3, and then unlocks from team and investors after that. So it's like the supply demand dynamics, I think, are the challenge there, but it's just figuring out. I think a lot of that is hedged, like, and you kind of saw that with the last unlock where the impact was pretty small. Like
I was looking at it this morning. Like the funding rate has flipped like positive on
it's pretty volatile though, so it's
volatile,
like
yeah.
it'll kind of go back and forth. So I definitely think a decent amount is hedged, particularly when it ran up to like $1.50. I think you saw OI pick up.
Okay, never mind. It's back to today. It's negative. Yeah, so you can kind of monitor this over time.
Like at some point they have this like, because recently they shifted over yield to SUSD, right? Like from the insurance fund, and that just boosted like the SUSD yield to like 36.5% or something. And it seems like the sweet spot is around like 25% for people actually for seeing positive like minting activity. And you're also seeing like more like markets for that and stuff. And I think eventually they can shift over a bunch of that yield to ENA as well, right? And like counter a lot of the unlocks with that, because they have like real. I don't know what the latest numbers are. Actually, I should probably look that up. But it's one of the most profitable protocols in crypto, and also to me, just one of the best narratives. Like, still the stablecoin is like the killer app, and I think these guys are going to have the highest risk adjusted. Well, risk adjusted is like a matter of perspective, but I have 90% of my stables or something in Athena, so I'm pretty confident with the on that, and I think it is a good risk adjusted yield. It's just like the supply demand dynamics. It's just really hard to know, because some stuff unlocks and it's like a Solana event, right, where it's like just a non-event. And other stuff unlocks, or Lido even. Like Lido, people talked a lot about the unlocks, and then it was in a non-event. And then other stuff unlocks and it's brutal, right? And it's really hard to know how much is hedged and how many secondary transactions happen, so that the cost basis, what the actual cost basis is. So yeah, I'm very bullish on Athena, but yeah, that's kind of the main concern, I'd say.
It's also the investor base. Are they
and also the protocol
kind of reconcentrating,
like successful,
or are they historically sellers of immediate liquidity, which I think is also partially driven by whether it's primarily kind of LP capital versus internal capital.
Yeah. Also, it's just like if you can make a reasonable argument for its valuation versus like some of this shit is just like, at least it's like a product and revenue. Some of this stuff is literally like vapor.
Yeah, that's also my bull thesis for it. It's just like there's a lot of vapor out there commanding huge valuations, and I think as unlocks happen, like ENA could just absorb a lot of that, like shift to ENA as like because when I look around at ETH beta, it's just tough to find something as attractive. I don't know what else you guys. What about Lido? I know, Jan, you were bullish. No.
Oh, by the way, I was bullish like beginning of 2023.
Yeah,
that was a pain trade.
So I think on the ENA stuff, just like you said,
it ripped. What are you talking about?
Okay,
end of 22 and beginning of 23, it absolutely ripped.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the ENFTs have to be careful about the unlocks, and like, yeah, it's kind of hard to tell, but it's definitely better than most low float high FTV coins. Uh, Lido, I feel like, is one where, well, here, can I maybe lay out the kind of thought process and like why the ETH ETF is going to be more bullish, so we can go into like
Please.
specific coins
Yeah.
it'll affect. Yeah, so I wrote a thread on this earlier this week where basically, as I was saying earlier, the Bitcoin ETF is like very isolated, but let's say like ETH were to kind of like double upon this ETF because there's a lot of positive flows, and excitement around it. ETH doubles, that has like a massive ripple effect through the DeFi ecosystem where like TVL and all these protocols like Lido, like Maker, like Eigenlayer or something is all when it's mostly ETH is going to like double itself, and then that like boosts yields, that boosts fees, which then translates into like higher, like stronger fundamentals for these altcoins, which like catches a bid for them. Then there's more activity on chain, and as these bid comes for these altcoins, and like new projects launch or projects like ramp up their liquidity mining, and so it kind of is this loop where ETH goes up, kind of makes DeFi's fundamentals look better just from the ETH price going up, causing more activity, new launches, liquidity mining, which like sucks in more capital of ETH. And then you get metrics like the burn and users going up, which I feel like the TradFi analysts will get like all excited about, which like could push more flows. So I think you could see like a very 2021-esque move where kind of like ETH is really carrying the whole like ETH DeFi ecosystem and all these ETH alts, whereas with the BTC ETF, there's no direct flow into alts. Like people are holding BTC. We saw like a decent run in like ordinals and runes and stuff, but there's no direct implications to like Bitcoin DeFi of Bitcoin going up, and it's much harder to spend Bitcoin, right? Like there's a lot more friction involved in like, and also just like the culture of Bitcoin. People want to hold Bitcoin. The type of people who are holding Bitcoin are probably like more aligned with Bitcoin versus ETH is like more open-minded community. The price goes up, they're more willing to spend it and deploy into these protocols. So you just have like a way more kind of like reflexive dynamic and an effect among the whole ecosystem, which you just didn't have on the Bitcoin ETF. So I feel like laying that out, you could kind of get a revitalization of like Ethereum alts and Ethereum DeFi. You also have some of the smaller coins like the on-chain coins that are like paired with like their liquidity in ETH, that just by ETH going up, like they will go up alongside them. So I'm like pretty bullish alts here.
I agree with that. And like Jason always says, right, that no one on crypto Twitter owns enough Bitcoin, right? We're all underexposed to Bitcoin. I definitely am. But doesn't that mean also the ETH ETF itself would be less bullish ETH if ETH people are more likely to sell and distribute to altcoins?
Well,
Yeah,
I think it drives like it drives this whole flywheel of like, okay, they sell, buy more altcoins, new liquidity mining programs come out, which like make ETH yields more attractive, and like you have the burn going, and then like more TradFi flows. It's like a big loop where Bitcoin is just like, okay, you buy Bitcoin, the price goes up. There's no kind of like secondary effects of that happening.
Yes and no. I mean, the ETH beta trade has failed so many times, right? Unless
ETH's been going down
into specifically. Well, even when it's gone up, it's like unless you've managed to time it really, really well, you've likely underperformed ETH, right? If you look at any kind of arbitrary optimism, all of the charts against ETH,
okay, well those
you've typically
are like
underperformed. Well, if you're thinking
dynamics.
about right, but if you're thinking about things that can actually absorb enough liquidity to detract from flows into ETH, you have to be thinking of very large FDV tokens that otherwise, there are going to be individual alts, but they're not big enough to cannibalize ETH demand, right? So like, what else can
but
ETH
why
memes
why does
really
it need to like cannibal? Like, why do you need?
Well, if we're talking about why it could be not as bullish for ETH, because you're going to pile into ETH alts, right? If there
I'm not saying it's going to be not as bullish for ETH. I think it's going to be bullish for everything.
Right, like, but that was said earlier.
Everything goes up.
Yeah, but like if you're the risk return on some of these larger ETH alts that can actually cannibalize demand isn't really there. So it's basically the counter argument to ETH it not being as bullish ETH because there are other liquidity sinks for it. So I guess, yeah, otherwise it's kind of ETH memes, Pepe has kind of been the winner. I think the Polyfi memes are gonna continue to do well with the kind of adjustment in sentiment from U.S. government. I think it'll actually probably open the door for centralized exchange listings, where if you look at kind of memes that were limited to dexes, they had a ceiling that was a high 9 figs, and it was usually only until they got centralized listings that they were able to kind of go beyond that. So I think that was previously not possible, but now it seems like these guys are kind of changing their tune on that front, which is going to be bullish there. ETH NFTs were usually a pretty good way to get some ETH beta, but this cycle it looks like memes have cannibalized that approach, right? Where it's a more liquid, fungible, easy to deploy size way of kind of getting beta on various chains. But I do think like the NFT rotation will probably come back. I don't know. I don't think it'll be to the same degree just because you see memes. But if you have a scenario where memes run up a lot and NFTs haven't really moved, that's probably a pretty ideal time to rotate into those. And once the FDV of some of these memes just gets kind of silly, where the upside is fairly limited, it just makes sense to kind of look for beta elsewhere.
Yeah, so are you just kind of going through the different plays that you're just going through the different plays?
Yeah, just trying to what sectors. Basically, you kind of have you have like DeFi 1.0 or like Dino DeFi, right? Those have typically, as of late, underperformed ETH. I think Maker has actually gone down. I have Maker bags, and I'll probably be adding more if they kind of keep going lower here. But that thing's underperformed. Like most ETH beta has been higher downside, lower upside beta.
What do you guys think about? I mean, obviously, a lot of this is driven by the ETH ETF, or most of it. And if BlackRock is talking about tokenization, you think that narrative probably picks up more? I mean, Ondo and stuff like that, I think is trading at near all-time highs or above previous all-time highs.
Yeah, but that's one where it's like a super low float.
Yeah. I'm not saying Ondo specifically, but like that narrative, anything in there interesting or not really?
Probably.
It's hard to get excited on a fundamental basis though there.
Yeah.
It's
really
definitely
hard.
a swing trade, but it's yeah.
I mean, Ondo's, I would never have expected like a 12 billion fully diluted valuation.
Yeah, but it's
sure
just a
like
fucking
200 million.
low float thing.
Huh?
It's just the low float thing. I think
it's
something that
float. It's like a 15% float.
No, it's like obfuscated. It's like obfuscated, where it's really much lower than that.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know the word. That's how
I'm excited about
obfuscated.
I'm excited about tokenization. I just don't know that there's a good play to capture.
A good play for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll talk about some stuff that's actionable for our audience here, so instead of just pontificating about random shit. Okay, guys. So if ETH goes up, I think there's gonna be a massive opportunity in on-chain stuff that's been did really well and kind of pre-Bitcoin ETF. Then Bitcoin ETF came out and just memes on Sol and stuff took over. But there's a lot of pretty strong projects on Ethereum, some good people to follow, Crypto Sivo, I think, and then Camino, my account, those types of accounts, my account, Flight Capital, that talk about these on-chain alts that have some good businesses. I've talked about Banana a lot before, but it's these coins that are in the perfect scenario where they have strong fundamentals. All their LP is in ETH, so if ETH goes up, you just automatically get that beta to them, and they have businesses surrounding ETH or the ETH ecosystem that actually have strong fundamentals, and the whole kind of reflective flywheel that I talked about before will benefit them a lot. So you have a lot of tailwinds where it's maybe a return back to ETH season, ETH L2s versus a lot of the action's been happening before on Solana, and I'm sure there's some good projects on Solana too. But this, you have the ETH LP, which will go up if ETH goes up, so you just get an insta bid from that. You have the whole DeFi ecosystem kind of getting revamped, more attention there. And then you have these exchanges like Binance kind of put out this note the other week with all this like low float, high FDV controversy on Twitter that they want to start listing projects that people like aren't just going to get wrecked on. Basically, like the exchanges have been making a shit ton of money doing these launches where like, you know, whatever fucking wormhole launches at a $20 billion valuation, in no one's right mind can they justify that. And then, you know, the exchanges clean up, but all the users just kind of get screwed. So there's kind of been a shift away from that. The market's getting slightly more educated on that. Hopefully that education will continue. And then a shift to maybe some of these more products that are like interesting, have some fundamentals, are paired with the ETH, can take advantage of the ETH season. I personally like Banana a lot. I've talked about that a lot. I own some, obviously, so not financial advice, but those type of on-chain coins where it's like, you know, if you're an individual investor, you're not like a fund trading massive size, like you can get into these, take advantage of these trends. I think that there's going to kind of be a return to on-chain, which has gotten really hammered over the past like
what does that look like other than
the Bitcoin ETF?
So I feel like so far we have Maker. Maybe some people are bullish on Ina. We're somewhat bullish on Banana. You're bullish on Duncan. Is there any others? Any others? By the way, none of this obviously is investment advice. See a disclaimer.
Well, like I don't want to list specific.
I think Polyfi memes still do well.
Yeah,
memes, election season, right? And a bunch of them are on ETH.
No, I think that there's a lot of good projects on ETH that are just like smaller that have just like been unloved. Like look for projects with like stronger fundamentals, and it's just I don't know any that I want to say. I also like Synapse here because obviously the bridge, it's gotten hammered pretty hard, and they're going to be eventually launching this Sin chain, which like obviously benefits from, you know, more ETH activity, more ETH L2s, more chains launching their L2s. But there's those are kind of the ones I mentioned previously. But there are some like good fundamental projects that if you look, I think there's going to be a return to kind of ETH, and especially like the ETH LP pairs. Like you don't even understand how much you can just get carried from ETH going up. Like ETH doubles, and your coin just basically doubles alongside it just from ETH going up. And then if you get some extra bids in there, like it's pretty easy to get some nice beta. Like I had the example of Banana on the ETF day. It's like main liquidity is ETH Banana. ETH was up 20%. Banana was up instantly 20% from that, and then caught another 30% bid from just like people buying alongside of it. Versus like there's some other coins that just like, you know, maybe get benefited as much, like Maker, for example, great example, like didn't move at all on the ETH ETF because its liquidity isn't paired. So like there's a lot of opportunity in these kind of and these on-chain plays. So just go look out there.
Yeah.
I mean, how confident are you that you get that revival of on-chain versus everybody just looks at what happened on Sol and just bids the most
memes?
Well,
turbo
memes, ETH calls,
names.
Because ETH going up literally drives this stuff. That's what I'm trying to fucking say, Jason. It's like ETH going up makes all the TVL go up, makes all the fees go up, makes all the yield go up, and it literally drives the cycle, which just isn't the case in any other ecosystem, because every other ecosystem is just like doesn't have DeFi built out to the extent. Like even like ETH going up 20%. Oh, like that just like increased the TVL and probably fee generation of like every single DeFi protocol.
But yes and no. So TVL is, well, it depends on the business model.
Yeah, I know.
No, because like TVL, like it's turnover, right? Like most of them are volume based, not TVL based protocols. Like yes, you could point at it, but you know, from a fee generation perspective, it's not an AUM fee. It's based on turnover.
I feel like there's some pretty good ones that are like Lido. There's an AUM one, like whatever, fucking Eigenlayer or something. Like I don't know if like ones that have.
It's almost like not Eigenlayer than Pendle, right? If it's like where are you getting beta to Eigenlayer almost, which has done well, to be fair, but
yeah, I just think that it's kind of hard to explain because the factors are so intertwined with each other. But once you get like enough ETH momentum and like activity on the chain, this wheel starts to spin. And it's kind of difficult. It's like, okay, which one comes first? Which exactly triggers it? I think just like a general return to like ETH being, you know, hotter, just general flows into ETH, you know, the ETH wealth effect of like, you know, people bidding alts. like there's so many good examples of this last cycle. I feel like a great example of this last cycle was like Curve and Convex, right?
But everything went up last cycle, regardless of what chain it was on. Everything went up.
I know, and that's what I'm saying is going to happen again on ETH. Because so like
these other chains didn't have any of that shit last cycle, and they went up infinite too. That's my point.
What, like Sol and then the next thing that's going to happen after ETH does this, it's going to get so fucking congested, and the gas fees are going to be so high that everyone's going to go to Solana, which is, you know, the next point of this thesis that we've been talking about a lot internally. I'm like, I can just see this happening. Just like,
I mean, I fully buy into your thesis, Duncan. I'm just looking at what the market has showed me up until now, and it still seems like the bid for memes, Pepe, is up 100% in the last 2 weeks. Banana's not up 100% in the last 2 weeks. No other coin that I see on ETH is up 100% in the last 2 weeks. Right? So, like, the market is telling me, telling anybody who wants to pay attention.
But Banana's at, like, what is Banana at 5? Pepe's at 5 billion right now?
Yeah, it went up 2.5 billion in the last 2 weeks, more than Banana, the 10x Banana's market cap.
That's a big move. So now
rotate,
rotate your Pepe bags.
So, like, the question is, like,
please, I beg you.
Like, I don't know. The market is just, I don't know. It seems like it's telling me that it's like, yo, the bid is still on.
Yeah, because the ETH ETF hasn't happened yet, sir. Once it happens, don't you worry.
You could be right. You know, I do hope you're right to an extent.
All right. Do we want to keep going? Do we want to talk about that second part of the thesis of ETH getting congested and then moving to Solana, or do we want to move? Yeah, you guys want to touch on that a little bit, or?
Well, what is there even like? I think it's just a given that it's going to happen.
I don't see why. I think
I don't know if there's them.
Well, I think it would move to L2s more than it's more likely to move to L2s.
It doesn't even have to move. It's just like once you see congestion, the other stuff starts getting bid up in anticipation. You don't even need the activity to move over, like purely from a price action perspective. It's played out this way before. It doesn't necessarily mean it'll keep happening, but I think that's kind of the mindset of that. Like basically, it'll happen. The question is to what degree, right? Because it's so expected.
I think Sol is definitely. Kyle Samani had an interesting point we recorded a podcast with him and Arthur Hayes the other week, just saying that Sol's unlock was apparently, and I didn't know this, it was apparently fully unlocked at once. Like there was no vesting. And so you just kind of like,
cliff.
Yeah, you kind of just like ripped off the Band-Aid there. It's interesting. Like there is like something to that, right? Because Sol has been apeable, like in size, liquid for so long. Whereas a lot of these L2 tokens, it's just hard to go in confidently with the supply dynamics, right? And so because the token isn't investable, it doesn't catch like a great bid, and like the whole ecosystem kind of gets hurt by that.
Yeah, but then like you had the Friend, like obviously Friend is like completely different, but like Friend launch, I'm like, oh, this looks pretty cheap at 200 mil, and then like, you know, I think it's trading down 50%. It's at like 100 mil, and that could be a problem with like just Friend not getting a ton of traction outside of the airdrop stuff. But I would really like to see like an actual project launch at like a decent valuation and see what happens, because it's super depressing to see even these like good projects just launch at like a crazy valuation where like they just can't build the community, they just can't get it, like the price just can't go up. But the incentives are all fucked up.
It's hard because it's also you really have to, and you can't do this, isolate the broader market sentiment when this happens, right? Like Sol happened end of 2020. You could have done there was nothing you could do to a token and not have it go up in 2021, right? So it's hard to isolate the market sentiment from the mechanism and say this is purely mechanism based, this is or not. So that's kind of the tricky part. But I definitely agree with ripping off the overhang, even, you know, thinking about unlocks that happen on a daily basis versus weekly versus monthly versus quarterly. I think it's a lot better to kind of have it lumpy and then have clarity for, you know, a decent amount of time to actually let organic price action take place without there being fear of kind of the unlock happening so soon, versus this drip that you just know yes, it might not be everyone, but there's definitely someone constantly selling this thing every single day. And so, yeah, I'm in the camp of ripping the Band-Aid off, not necessarily saying it all needs to happen up front, because, you know, you need incentives, you need people to keep building. You don't want people kind of getting rich immediately and then just not caring. But there's benefit to it being lumpy.
Yeah. And that also explains a lot of the, like, you know, the Pepe action, right? Like there's something you can ape where you know that like it's ETH, it's pure ETH beta without any supply overhang issues. And that's, I guess, like, yeah, memes and some of the others we spoke about are the only ones that really make sense for that. Do we want to chat about the political stuff? Maybe a lead in from the politics memes. Just obviously, like a lot of people have talked about this. I don't know that we have any special insight. I think the main thing for me is just how bullish. Like I can't understate, I guess, or overstate rather, how bullish I think this is for the industry. Like there's been so much innovation that's been held, innovation and just like value capture to tokens, like founders not wanting to found companies in the US, spending like millions of dollars on lawyers with complicated Panama structures, moving out of the country. Like it's just been such an overhang, like the whole Gensler bullshit. That the fact that Trump came out so bullish pro crypto, and like in a really, you know, like it wasn't just some, like the original one where he responded to Frank Digos or whatever was pretty much just like a soundbite. But then he came out for talking about self custody, talking about not letting Elizabeth Warren and her goons take your Bitcoin away, like very specific things that really resonate. I mean, the Ross Ulbricht thing, like some very specific things that really resonate with a crypto audience that just make it so bullish. And Biden's obviously like switch strategies too. He's, you know, probably given Gensler a call about the ETH ETF, and then there's like rumors. There was an article today about how the Biden administration is reaching out to crypto companies and sort of changing their tune, trying to get some ideas on what policy makes sense. So this has become like an important issue somehow suddenly, and that is like incredibly bullish. Like the most bullish thing to me that happened like in the last sort of year or so is this pivot, because the US is still, in spite of itself, the hub for crypto. Like there's a lot of top projects come from the US, and this has been like a huge issue. So I think if we can get some clarity on regulation, we're going to see tokens start to do like be able to have a lot more flexibility in their token models, distributions, and stuff like this. We're going to see people just be able to spend more time shipping and less time worrying about getting sued. You know?
Yeah, it's
No,
kind of my biggest. It's kind of one of the things I'm most excited about going forward. You know, bringing the ETH catalyst up is great for the short term, but I'm still in the camp that would have been bullish to have it later on. But now I think this is a much bigger one. It kind of started with, you know, Trump talking at that dinner, doing like a 1 hour basically Q&A at his NFT dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and from what I heard, like a quarter of that hour was basically spent on crypto, and then and then kind of I think the response to that and the realization that he can generate an insane amount in donations really helped him shift his tune on that front. But it's one of the things that can revitalize buildings. I think in terms of, you know, what I was excited about in you know, in terms of what was being built in like 2018, 2019, 2020, even 2021, it seemed like there was a lot more to be excited about, a lot more kind of experimentation happening. And now it's just not to the same degree. I think it's a combination of things, right? One is the regulatory front. One, I think, you know, for all the fun that meme coins create, I do think they're a bit toxic in terms of incentives for builders, right? Where it's, you know, what's the real effort in putting together something where it's going to take me years to realize this. There's an insane amount of regulatory risk, and it's not even something where I can follow the rules and be confident in the fact that I will get through unscathed. I have like a relatively, you know, dishonest and irrational regulatory body coming after me. And so that, you know, when you take that and combine it with the fact that there's so many get rich quick kind of meme coin situations, whether you're starting them, whether you're spending time and just trying to figure out what the best option is, or whether you're just kind of comfortable sitting in it, you know, for the majority of the cycle, I think it does disincentivize. It adds to the to the list of disincentives on the builder side. So I do think you'll get to some level of meme coin kind of saturation, right? Where you kind of go, there's a few big winners, then you have this long tail of random stuff, but then the long tail gets too long and there's too much crap and you get a kind of a reconcentration towards the majors. But then as those majors get really big, you kind of need to look for new opportunities. And I think you'll have some kind of accordion effect with the meme coins where like, the big ones will get too big, then you'll go long tail again. But I think it'll kind of play out to a smaller degree each time. And so that will be a tailwind for the builder component alongside the regulatory front, where you can experiment and all the other kind of elements you mentioned without going into them. So yeah, that's one of the bigger personal tailwinds in terms of building out use cases and tapping into real world kind of utility, not like RWAs, but actually consumer based apps that can make sense and allow people to build them in a way that they know they can confidently go to market with the token. Because we chatted about this before, but the token is a massive tool that doesn't exist outside of crypto, and in terms of having liquidity and using it as incentive. And so that's one of the reasons we're all super bullish on the space. But it was handcuffed by this unreasonable regulatory kind of landscape. So getting that out of the way and actually providing a way for them to do so is incredibly bullish, yeah, and can kind of create very long-term tailwinds and not these one-off large liquidity events that are these ETFs.
I definitely agree with all of that. Kind of like the way I was looking at it when we wrote our year ahead reports back in December of 2023. Like one of the things, excuse me, one of the things we talked about was like, this upcoming year would either be, very bullish for crypto from a regulatory standpoint or probably very bearish, right? Like on one hand, you have the actively hostile administration with Biden. On the other hand, you have like the Republicans, which at the time they weren't like super like, pro crypto. They just weren't like actively hostile against it. I don't think anybody really saw this 180 coming. And I think this ETH ETF, shakeup and approval news kind of overshadowed just how important this, this regulatory shift is. And when you go back to 2016 and you just look at markets, right? Specifically, all of the industries that Trump was like, friendly to during the campaign, or at least like promising to try to help or not kill coal, right? All these things, all of these industries are ripped entirely for the year after he was elected, right? And so like when you think about it, it's like, okay, like ancillary industries will probably benefit in a better, regulatory environment. That makes a ton of sense. And the fact that both presidents are pretty much fiscally the exact same, they're just going to spend infinite money. It's just like, it essentially made like the 50-50 outcome of like, okay, Trump wins, crypto will do good. Biden wins, crypto will have problems, right? It kind of removed that decision making and entirely to some degree, right? It's like, okay, like they're both kind of promising to make crypto, more palatable from a regulatory standpoint, which then should, address all of the issues you guys brought up with, devs, value accrual, all that good stuff, right? So then if the question is both are going to be, generally good and they're both going to spend infinite money, like kind of seems very, it's kind of like clearing the path for crypto and ancillary industries, in my opinion.
Yeah, just on that front, I do think so. It's hard to trust what politicians are saying before and after elections. I do think the Trump campaign would be more likely to actually be bullish on it, whereas I think the puppets that are controlling the carcass that is Biden will very quickly turn on that if he wins.
I mean, the only other thing that's been talked about the last 2 weeks, but we've covered it to death, and none of us want to cover it anymore, is the low float, high FTV stuff. Like everyone suddenly had a take on it. There's like a million VC blogs on it and stuff, but I think we talked about it to death. I don't think it's worth chatting about too much more. So yeah, that was a great episode. Any parting words, or we good to wrap up?
Yeah, I think big dips are for buying.
The denominator is worthless. The bid is infinite.
Oh, did you see Saylor change his tune on the ETH ETF? That was wild.
What the what Bitcoin did podcast? Like
no,
what,
yeah,
what
was it there? Well, initially he was like, obviously, you know,
might be
there
a
is no second
second
best,
best.
etc. And like the ETH ETF, Bitcoin will be the only token to have an ETF. ETH is a security; they're going to go after it and stuff.
Oh,
And
that was
then
such
it
a
was
dumb take.
sorry,
That was a dumb take to begin with, though.
it
Right?
was a dumb take, absolutely. But yeah, but he hard pivoted, right? To like he was like, actually the ETF is really good for crypto and for Bitcoin. We're gonna have like a crypto industry. It was like very strange to hear him
Well, I
say
think
this.
he realized that on the political side, like how strong the broader industry was, because like there's not that many like
Yeah,
businesses built around Bitcoin versus like the rest of crypto. Like there's a lot of political power in businesses and like mouths, like network effect built around the other. So I think maybe he realized like it's probably better if we're all aligned here, like in terms of like
Yeah.
the for Bitcoin and for everyone. Maybe he's gonna bid a little
Long term,
late.
definitely. Yeah,
what
heard he's
happens to
long
Gensler?
BTC.
What happens to Gensler? I hope
Well,
bad.
I think consensus is that he's kind of out either way, right? Regardless of what administration wins.
What a
I guess
weird
the question
mark
is
to
more
leave in the
so,
world. You went after
yeah.
Ripple and lost. You tried to kill
I
the
think,
industry and lost to Ripple.
but
So,
like, do you think it's actually him or like I feel like he was just getting orders? Like all the MIT like professor videos of him, like he seems like kind of upbeat about it.
Regardless if it's
He
him or
clearly has
Bearish, we're still betting.
Algorand bags. I think it's just orders.
Just another weak person in the suits making policy.
all right, guys. Thanks very much. This was an awesome one, and see you again in 2 weeks for another Hive Mind. We might have some exciting news in the meanwhile, so stay tuned.
See ya.
Thanks, everyone.
Nothing said on the Hive Mind is a recommendation to buy or sell securities or tokens. This podcast is strictly for informational purposes only, and any views expressed by anyone on the show are solely our own opinions, not financial advice.